Good afternoon, everybody. Should be live in the VTF and live in the YouTube. Let's jump in. I'm an associate member of T3 Trading Group, which is an SEC registered broker dealer and member of FINRA SIPC. All of my trades are placed through T3 Trading Group. You should carefully consider whether trading is suitable for you in light of your own financial condition. Here's a position disclosure. I got into SEDG again long on the big pullback today. Just kind of reinitiated the position I had a couple weeks ago that I did pretty well with into the pullback. And I initiated and kept a little bit, not too much, a little bit IWM short, just because it's kind of hitting that point. And I kind of updated, some of my options positions that I have been doing with some success, some put selling that I've been doing with some success the last few weeks. All right, let's jump in. So the SPYs finished up a 0.25%, the Qs finished up a 0.25%, and the IWM, just having to pull it off my screen because otherwise it'll show my position, which compliance doesn't want me to show my sizing. The Russell finished up 1.8%. So again, Q's up 0.3, IWM up 1.8. RSP, though, did not participate in the same way today, I don't think. RSP's up a little bit, maybe a 0.25% or so, with the SPY also being up about a 0.25%. So we still got some continuation of the rotation today, but it was a little bit different. The RSP didn't participate in the same way, but the IWM certainly continued to maintain the bid that it had. So I guess just to recap a little bit, after Thursday, which was such a massive and historic day, on Friday we said that the market probably needs some healing to kind of reset up, because the charts were a mess to some degree in both directions. They needed to reset up, and you can look at the Qs giving a bearish engulfing candle on that day, which usually indicates that you need to kind of reset up, pull back a little bit deeper, or best case scenario, give an inside and up to kind of reheal the pattern a little bit. Whereas the IWM by the end of Thursday was approaching extreme extension, and then Friday gapped up, and then today gapped up, and even was able to continue today, gap and continue higher, which is just incredible. But after 3 huge up days in a row in the Russell, this chart very clearly needs some healing. It's very difficult to buy IWM 217 right now if you didn't have it from 208 or better. I do remember even back here on the day with the huge gap up post CPI, we said you probably could do, you could chase the IWM a little bit more than we typically see, just because this was such a change of a picture here for the Russell. So if you don't have the IWM from probably Thursday, some point on Thursday or prior to Thursday, it's very hard to do anything new at 217. And if you're doing anything new at 217, you're probably better off looking to the short side for a short-term trade than you are looking for the long side for continuation at this point. But as far as the short trade goes, we've discussed that you really got to pick your spots on that short trade, because as we kind of expected, and now as we have seen, the IWM breakout, just with the lack of performance that it has had, could very easily give some serious momentum to the upside as money rotates in for the first time and plays a little bit of catch up on what had been historic underperformance from the IWM compared to the Qs. The unwinding of that trade, the unwinding of sell everything to buy the best 3-5 stocks in the S&P, could be a very large unwind, and that's exactly what's happened. I mean, the unwind here has been massive. It's just an insane 3 days higher in the IWM. The IWM at highs today basically got to $10 of extension, which is really wild. I don't know I'd be curious to know if there was ever a time that the Russell's gotten $10 extended to the upside. What about this move back here in like 23? Yeah, $5, $5. I don't know if the IWM. I would assume it's not the first time in history, but it wouldn't be surprising. What about this move in 2021? Let's say 437. No, even that's not 10. It's like $7, $8. It's like almost $8 of extension back here, and that was in the run to all-time highs. Maybe in this insane 2020-21 period. But yeah, this might be just as a measure, a simple measure from the ADMA on the daily chart. This might be the most extended the IWM has ever been from the ADMA on the daily, which is, again, it's not surprising, or at least at highs today. It's not surprising. If anything, I would argue that it was expected that we could see this sort of move. But finally into a day 3 here on the IWM. I still wouldn't say that I'm short the IWM aggressively, but I'm slightly more aggressive than I was with the day trades that I took on Thursday and Friday of last week, which both worked pretty well. I was able to cover a decent amount into the pullback. I'm positive on the name at the end of the day here, and decided to just keep a little bit, because even after we pulled back $1 from highs, we're still like $9 or a little bit under $9 extended away from the ADMA on the daily, which is just massive for the Russell. The $10 million question just continues to be, what kind of legs can this rotation have? And I think it can have some legs. I think it can continue, but at a certain point you can't continue vertically like this. And that'll be the real first test. Right now this is just a momentum rotation trade, right? The real test to see if we can have any degree of lasting rotation, which is not something that I necessarily want to call for, is going to be on the first real pullback in the Russell. When the momentum of this trade fades, and then that momentum needs to become trend for continuation, that'll be the real... I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but that'll be the real situation in which we know if this is a bigger real move or not. And I'm definitely uncertain about it. If anybody listened to my meeting with Greta today at 12:30, which you can find on YouTube if you missed, I was talking about my broader concerns on if we see a pullback in August, which I think could start as early as maybe the last week of July. If we see a pullback in the August-September period, which I kind of think is likely, I'm not calling for a bear market, but to see a 5 to 12% correction, something like that, out of the S&P over the course of the period of time that leads into the election would definitely not be surprising, or at a minimum does not see continuation in the same way as we've seen it, especially with the market just up so much as it is on the year already. If that happens, I'm really curious to see what it looks like underneath the hood. If you get a real pullback in the market, it's probably because there's money coming out of the leaders, because that's where that's got the biggest effect on the market. And Apple and Nvidia, we know everybody's invested, everybody's involved in these Mag 7 stocks right now. The real question would be, if you get a pullback in the market, do these IWM names actually hold in a little bit better and don't sell off as much as the market does, because there's still some actual rotation happening underneath the surface of things and people are just liquidating what they have the most of? Or is it just a situation where correlations actually increase and they sell everything all at once? It'll be really interesting to see what happens in some sort of real pullback. And again, I think that's going to be the real test of whether or not the rotation theme can last or not. Do they sell everything at once, or does an S&P pullback come specifically from them selling Nvidia and Apple and the other Mag 7 stocks, but yet some of that money is being rotated into other names that enables the index to hold up a little bit more? So that'll be really interesting to see. We're a ways away from it. I think even from a timeline, even if I'm correct, we might be a month away or 2 months away or a couple weeks away. but I still don't think it would necessarily begin this week. I don't see any reason for it to start. Obviously, we'll see what happens with the Mag 7 earnings reports. If there's any major surprises there, that could be a catalyst that leads to more rotation or leads to a broader market sell as well. But it's all to be determined. At this point, it's just a matter of what does this market look like as it heals, because this Russell extension, it could continue again tomorrow. It could become even more extended, but like I was just saying, I wouldn't be surprised if someone's able to run a scanner or a look back or something. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the most stretch, especially at highs on an intraday basis, that the IWM has ever traded on the upside away from its ADMA on the daily. So that probably needs to heal, it needs to rest, it needs to reset up before we can do any real trading with it. And if you're doing anything with it right now, you're probably looking to short. But as we discussed, the momentum is just so strong that the short is difficult, and you have to be a little bit conservative with it. Whereas the NASDAQ and the SPYs, they're trying to heal. You know, the SPYs had a pretty good comeback between Friday and today. Today's a little bit of a doji day, but it's a doji day that's at the highs of Thursday, so I think that's really productive, actually. The NASDAQ needs to do a little more work. The Qs tried to give an inside and up today, but failed into that $500 area and came back down. So I'm not satisfied that this move higher in the Qs is something that is immediately negating this negative Maribozu from Thursday at this 503.28. It looks like these Qs still need a little bit more healing. So it's kind of the big picture index level of the market. You know, I'm still a big believer in when the stars line up and the market sets up perfectly that you want to be aggressive, and when the market requires some technical healing, which, by the way, when I say technical healing, what I mean by that is markets expand and contract over time. When markets are going through an expansionary period, that's when your breakout occurs, and that's a great opportunity, if you can time it properly, to be involved in the expansion, to buy the breakout. But after that breakout occurs, after the expansion period happens, you need to go through a healing process of that extension. The healing process sucks while you're in it a lot of times because the market has less opportunity. It's not as good from risk reward, probability of success perspective, but that's how the next setup actually occurs. You get that expansionary period, and then you get price contraction. Could be a bull flag, it could be a technical pivot that gives you a pivot low or whatever, and then that actually is how you build out the next set of large opportunities. So right now, after Thursday's move being just so big and so historic, that it really just seems like we're going through one of these healing processes right now, these last couple trading sessions, which makes the trading a little bit more difficult. You probably want to trade a little less actively, and that's just because the setups aren't there. Let the setup come to you. Let these setups redevelop, and that's how the next opportunities will actually come online. So that's where that's at. From a trading perspective today, I didn't do a whole lot that was new. You know, I day traded this AMIX pre-market, made a couple dollars. I got back into this Solar Edge. Solar Edge had bad news this morning, or at least the market interpreted it as bad news about a whole bunch of layoffs as part of a restructuring. I had gotten out of my position above 28, so I re-entered my position below 28, kind of just sticking with the same trade and same strategy of utilizing the money that I've already made in it to just go right back to the same trade and risk the money that I've made to potentially make more. And even after starting to buy it at 28 and it closed on lows today, I was able to still have positive P&L in it by a little bit here at the end of the day. So I kept some. I'll be swinging it. I started to build in very small in the IWM after 10 a.m. today at about 216, very small, and kind of worked it and traded it throughout the day. Just hitting that degree of extension, working towards $8, $9, $10 of extension in the IWM on a day 3. It's finally at the point where it's like, okay, I look to be a little bit more aggressive on the IWM short than when I just had a couple, little day trades here the last couple of trading sessions. So letting myself kind of build into it and trade it back and forth, similar to what I've described to you guys in the past, kind of just working it on like a 25-cent increment basis. As it acts as a hedge for myself. I probably wouldn't trade this way if I didn't have a lot of longs on that are correlated in some ways to the IWM, that it acts as a trade for me, but it also helps to hedge this degree of extension for me for the market. So I think that kind of covers everything that I've got on my end that is new. And I am, of course, happy to answer any questions that anybody has. So send them my way so that I can help in any way that I can make everybody better at trading. So not seeing anything in the VTF yet. I should mention, so I'm not going to do an afternoon meeting tomorrow because they asked me to do this like podcast YouTube thing at 4:30 tomorrow with Scott Redler and David Prince. So I somewhat reluctantly between us girls said yes. We'll see how that goes. So it's going to be at 4:30 tomorrow with Mike Como as the host and Scott Redler and David Prince. That's 4:30 tomorrow. So I'll encourage everyone to tune in for that, and hopefully it goes well. Anyway, in the YouTube here, Apex Joy is asking me for my opinion on Apple. Is Apple overbought, and should I take profit? So Apple is definitely starting to extend a little bit to the upside. It's been a very, very big move. It's not massively extended. I definitely don't dislike the idea of taking some degree of partial profit with the idea that you could rebuy that stock at the ADMA and kind of keep the cash flow difference if you wanted to. To me, that's good. And otherwise, continue just to implement a trailing stop higher. So Apple looks good. It can continue higher. Earnings will be soon-ish in the next few weeks, I'm sure. I haven't looked up the date for it yet. But it's moderately extended where it's not a terrible idea to consider taking some profit, especially if that is stock that you could potentially rebuy when equilibrium catches up. Pat letting us know that in DJT, is this getting hit here after hours on this headline? Yeah. Holders filed to sell 37.9 million shares. This prospectus relates to the recent. Yeah. So Trump is selling. Obviously, he's selling into this up move. I didn't have the tenacity myself to short this at the open just because they could have squeezed it insanely hard if they wanted to. But to me, outside of the potential of getting run over on a squeeze, this really seemed like a sell the news event to me on DJT, because if for no other reason than we know that Trump himself is almost definitely selling into this news. It was a very profitable situation for him over the weekend. I'm sure he probably would have preferred it maybe not to happen, but it's definitely a profitable situation when you own that many shares and it causes your stock to gap up 50% and you're in the process of selling it anyway. So DJT, they filed to sell even more shares, it looks like, and the stock is getting hit after hours here on it. Uvixi Bull is letting me know that the ratio chart on the QQQ IWM broke the last pivot high of the downtrend. So that's cool. That's notable as well. And I'm not surprised to hear that, obviously. What else, guys? Only 4:30. Maybe everyone got enough of me at 12:30 today and no one has any questions, which is fine. From Cyril, looks like the Qs are quite volatile. That's the truth. How do you see big tech companies in the near term? Sure. So I've been looking for the rotation trade a little bit just because the performance in the Qs have been so extreme. The negative Maribozu from Thursday is really important. I think that while we are below the high of that negative Maribozu, you don't really want to be heavily buying these QQQs until a deeper setup comes in. The Qs had a strong opportunity today to break higher and they failed. Pre-market this morning, Apple was relatively strong. It was gapping up big on positive news. NVIDIA was also really strong and was gapping up much bigger than the Qs were to near yesterday's high. The bulls had an opportunity to just take Apple and NVIDIA alone and cause that to let the Qs get above Friday's inside day high and then go after Thursday's negative Maribozu high, similar to what the SPYs have now done, and they failed to do that. So to me, because the Qs really had an opportunity to break higher today and failed, it's a further signal that they're not ready to buy the NASDAQ up in the near term, and therefore they're not ready to buy up, the Mag 7 again right now in the near term, which is further firepower for the rotation trade. But the rotation trade, like we've said, has become very extended in the near term, and also probably needs some time. I wouldn't be surprised if the Qs have more or less topped out until earnings hit. And then depending on the success or failure of those earnings reports, it wouldn't surprise me, honestly, unless the earnings reports are stellar, and they easily could be. You never want to count out the Magnificent Seven companies on their earnings reports. You never want to count out Apple on its earnings report. Maybe it decides it's going to do $1 trillion buyback instead of $110 billion buyback. I say that 3/4 joking. But if they disappoint in any way, I wouldn't be surprised if we're at like a year high almost in these Qs, which is not something that you really want to make a real call on when you're in an uptrend. The best thing is to always assume that the uptrend will continue, but just viewing this negative Maribozu, viewing the way that they couldn't break it higher and continue today, and the fact that earnings for the Mag 7 are going to be coming up here in the next couple of weeks, unless the earnings are so stellar that they break these things back up again, which I think is going to be tricky to do, I wouldn't be surprised if we're at like a serious kind of peak here for the Qs, which also makes sense from a seasonality perspective in July. We saw the same thing happen a year ago in July. The end of July last year was the start of a 12% correction that bottomed at the end of October. And I'm looking for similar seasonal weakness to kind of come in this August, September, October period, especially in front of the election, and then maybe when we get through the election we can get a bigger rip into the end of the year. But I don't like making big calls that are far out in time, because just so many things can happen between now and like the end of the year. But that's kind of generally what my thought process is, and it's too big of a call that I don't want to be on the record actually making it, because the trend is your friend and the trend's still higher. I wouldn't be surprised if the NASDAQ is either has already created or is near to creating kind of a year high. So we'll see. I'll tell you what, put me on the record for that call if it's right, but don't put me on the record for that call if it's not, because I said the trend is your friend and the trend is still higher. Joking, obviously. Half joking. Anything else, guys? We got plenty of time. I'm in no rush, but also don't mind wrapping it up early. Did a lot of talking today. Uvixi Bull says the top is in. I hope you're still not long Uvixi from the time you created that handle. And I don't think if the top is in for the Qs, I'm not necessarily saying the top's in for the IWM either, by the way. And as we've discussed, it always seems like the S&P benefits no matter where the rotation is. If they start selling Apple and Nvidia, it'll impact the SPYs just because of the market cap weighting. But if they're doing that while rotating to somewhere else, you won't see the SPYs pull back anything like you'll see the Qs pull back. So any top that I may be sort of half calling is very specific to the NASDAQ. Well, all right, guys and girls. I appreciate your time. Hope everybody had a decent day today. I'll see you all tomorrow morning.